When we start out here, I'll start out with an introductory statement. Day. Good to go?
Tape is rolling.
Okay. It is Wednesday, July 16th, 2008. My name is Steve Brown. I'm with the Cantigny First Division Foundation Oral History Project. Today we are in Hudson, Ohio, and I am speaking to Mr. Jack Durst. Mr. Durst, can you give us your last name and spell it, please?
Yes, it's Durst, D-U-R-S-T.
And you live in Mentor, Ohio now.
Correct.
Where were you born?
I was born in a small town in western Maryland.
What small town in western Maryland?
Midland, Maryland.
Okay. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Maryland and Midland, graduated from Valley High School, and moved to Ohio in 1967.
What was your high school experience like?
Typical high school was a very small high school. We had probably 95 people in my graduating class.
Did you do athletics or?
Yes, I did soccer, baseball, basketball, all the good stuff.
Okay. At the time you were in high school, were you aware of Vietnam?
Yes,
Okay.
in the later years, of course.
What was your understanding of it?
Didn't know a whole lot about it. Knew people that were going there, people that graduated ahead of me, other students, you know, and they would go and put their year in and come back, and not too many of them really said much about it.
Okay. You moved to Ohio after graduating from high school?
Yes, I did.
Why was that?
Western Maryland was not an area that had a lot of job opportunities. It was basically a coal mining and lumber area, very little manufacturing, and I didn't see the opportunity available staying there. So I came to Cleveland because of the industrial base and the opportunity for a job.
And where did you go to work?
I first started to work at TRW Incorporated in Euclid, Ohio.
TRW, the munitions manufacturer?
Yes.
And so you were working on a line manufacturing munitions?
Yes, we actually manufactured miniguns and M79 grenade launchers.
Okay. Why'd you join the Army?
Figured my name was coming up on a draft sometime soon, and I decided I wanted to make it now and get it over with so I could, you know, make my future plans and get on with my life.
Okay. When were you inducted into the Army?
May 8th of 1967.
Okay. And where'd you go from there?
I first went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Went for basic training. Went from Fort Bragg, North Carolina to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for advanced infantry training. I went from Fort Jackson to Fort Benning to the NCO school. It was something new that was started. In fact, I was in NCOC Class 4 that went through. It was started because so many of the non-commissioned officers in Vietnam were leaving the Army, or leaving because of Vietnam. And they needed trained NCOs, and this was the process they were using.
What was the transition like from civilian to soldier for you?
Not really a problem. I was basically physically fit, not that long out of high school, and the area I grew up in, there was always a lot of sports. We were involved in a lot of sports all the time, so it was basically the structure of, you know, somebody telling you what time you were going to wake up and what time you were going to go to bed and what time you were going to eat and what time you were going to do everything else. But other than that, I actually enjoyed the Army. I enjoyed the military.
Not a difficult transition for you?
Not at all.
Okay. What about NCO school? What was your thinking when they grabbed you and said, we want to make you an NCO?
Well, my thinking was that I really wasn't interested in that. I just wanted to get my 2 years in and get out, because I had actually had my volunteered for the draft, had my name moved up so I could go when I wanted. So I really wasn't interested in going to NCO school, but then one of the sergeants at Fort Jackson told me, well, you're going to go to NCO school for 12 weeks, then you're going to go to a training unit for 12 more weeks, and you'll be part of a training cadre. So you're looking at another 6 months. You know, the war may be over by then. So I decided it looked like a pretty good future.
Okay.
So
where did you do the training cadre?
We did this. Well, I went to NCO school at Fort Benning. It was the same NCO school, or the same school that the OCS candidates went through. They were 6 months wonders. We were 12-week wonders. So it was called. We were called Shake and Bake, Instant NCOs, just about anything you could think of. You know, when we got to Vietnam. But once we were finished with that, then I went back to Fort Jackson and trained troops there as part of their AIT. So I was part of the cadre with the AIT unit there.
What was the most important thing you learned at NCO school?
The most important thing I learned at NCO school was that you were out there to do a job, and you were a leader, and people were going to be looking to you for leadership. And the one process, or the one thought that always I kept in my mind was treat people the way I wanted to be treated. And it'll all work out, and it always did.
Was that something you picked up there at school, or something you brought in with you?
I think I probably brought it with me. Just my background, the way I was raised, you know, my whole upbringing.
Anything significant about that background that you brought to bear on this experience?
Well, I was raised basically by my grandparents, because my parents were divorced when I was very young. And my grandfather was just one of the best people in the world, and a great influence on everybody. And he was the person who would really, where I grew my values from.
From Fort Benning, then you go to Fort Jackson. How long were you at Fort Jackson?
It was another 12 weeks.
And you're helping supervise AIT?
Correct. Training, help them train.
How was that?
It was a good process, but again, you know, it was pretty much, we supervised them in the barracks, would get them ready for training, take them out to the course, and basically turn them over to the instructors. And then we would help as needed.
You couldn't have been that much older than some of the guys you were training.
Correct. I was probably younger than a lot of them.
How did that work?
Didn't seem to have a problem with it. Most of the soldiers respected the rank, even though a lot of them, you know, questioned how fast you got it, but they still respected it.
Were they aware of how fast you got it?
I don't think they were.
At that point?
Yeah.
Okay. 12 weeks at Fort Jackson. What happens next?
After that, we were off to Vietnam.
Did you get any leave before you went to Vietnam?
Yeah, I had a 30-day leave before I went to Vietnam.
What'd you do with that 30-day leave?
Just pretty much enjoyed the 30 days and partied.
Where?
Between Cleveland and Western Maryland.
So you went back to Cleveland, huh?
No, I came back to Cleveland, yeah.
Where did you land in Vietnam?
We landed at Ben Hoa, the big compound there.
Flew straight into Ben Hoa?
We flew from Oakland to Hawaii, and I think we were only in Hawaii for not even an hour, maybe two. Then from Hawaii to Clark Field in the Philippines, and refueled at Clark Field, and then flew into Ben Hoa, South Vietnam.
What was your first impression?
Well, when I first got there, I didn't know what to expect. I thought, you know, we're flying into a war zone. We're going to have to run off of this airplane and dive into a bunker or something of that nature. Instead, they got us off the airplane, out on the airfield, put us in a big formation, and marched us off the airfield. And as we were marching off, there were a lot of people applauding and clapping and cheering, and I thought, what's going on with this? You know, what's this all about? They happy to see us? Well, they were happy to see us because these are the guys that were taking our seats on the plane going home. So
And it was a 1-to-1 replacement in those days.
Absolutely.
Pull out a whole company. Who was with you when you got off the plane? Lieutenants? What ranks?
You know, I really don't know. I mean, it was a plane full of people, and other than one person I'd gone to NCO school with, which was Bill Otto, and him and I went over on the same plane. And I also flew over on a plane with a friend of mine that I had grown up with in Midland, Maryland, Bill Bevan. So we had gone through, in fact, he was taking advanced infantry training at Fort Jackson while I was there, part of the cadre, but he was in a different unit. But when it come time for us to fly to Vietnam, we were both on the same plane.
What were your first impressions of the physical environment of Vietnam?
It was hot, miserable. Surroundings, you know, you didn't know what to expect when you got there because you heard a lot of stories, but I mean, I basically didn't know where South Vietnam was. You know, just somewhere on a map, Southeast Asia, but I'd really never taken much time to even look it up. But it was very humid, very hot. Just kind of had an odor in the air, just musty all the time. It was a very beautiful place, though. I mean, the countryside itself was very pretty. Lush vegetation. Of course, you would come to hate that later on, but actually, if it would have been a place to visit, it would have probably been a very nice place to visit.
How long were you been home?
We were just there a few days till they got us assigned to our units. And myself and Bill Bevan and Bill Otto all got assigned to First Infantry Division. And so they put us on a truck and sent us from Benoit to Zion.
What did you know about the 1st Division when you set out?
Nothing more than what I had, you know, seen in movies and things of that nature. I knew, you know, they had a history. They were famous, you know. Everybody, I think, had heard of the Big Red One. But I guess I was happy to be assigned to that unit because at least I had heard of it.
What happens when? Where did they take you? Zion?
Into Zion.
What happens when you get to Zion?
We got to Zion and they processed us and sent us out to different units. Myself and Bill Otto both got assigned to the 1st to the 2nd. And my friend Bill Bevan got assigned to the 2nd of the 18th.
Okay, can you explain what you're saying with those numbers? First
to the 1st Battalion, 2nd Infantry, 1st Infantry Division.
Okay.
And Bill Bevans got assigned to the 2nd of the 18th, 2nd Battalion, 18th Infantry. And he went to Lai Kay, and Bill Otto and I both went to Quan Loy.
And Quan Loy is north of Lai Kay,
yes,
correct?
Quan Loy is a little further north of Lai Kay.
40,
on
50
Highway
miles.
13, yeah.
What was the 1st Division primarily doing at the time you arrived? What was their mission?
Our mission, we spent a lot of time at Quan Loy, and what I found out later that the reason we were assigned to the 1st to the 2nd is because the 1st to the 2nd had been part of the unit that had gone into the Iron Triangle and cleared out. This was where they had massed the assault on Saigon during the Tet Offensive. And they had quite a large buildup there. And I think it was the 1st to the 2nd.
They being the Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong.
Yes. And I think it was I'm not sure if it was the 11th Armored Cav or someone, but it was a mechanized unit and the 1st Battalion, 2nd Infantry who had gone in there to clean them out. And I think there were some other units involved. That was before my time, and I didn't really know a lot about it. But we were part of the replacements for people that were either wounded or lost in that operation.
What were your responsibilities once you got there?
Once we got there, they sent us to training, more training, what they called Jungle Devil School. And I think we spent probably 5 days, and it was just getting used to the environment. You know, it was basically inside the compound being trained by other people who had a history and who were veterans of various firefights and stuff, telling us what to look for, what type of booby traps to look for, things to watch out for. And from that point then we were assigned to our various companies. And once again, Bill Otto and I both were assigned to the same company, although we were assigned to different platoons. I went to Delta Company. We both went to Delta Company. I went to Mike Platoon, and I think Bill went to November Platoon. So we were in different platoons in the same company.
Forgive me, I'm trying to remember, was he an NCO at this point?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
What was the most important thing you think you learned in Jungle Devil School?
I don't know if I really learned a whole lot there. It was stuff we'd already had previously. We'd been trained, in AIT, and I think it was more a reinforcement that now you're here, now it's real. If you didn't get this before, now it's time to get it. Because these are the things can hurt you. These are the things you have to watch out for.
Okay. You're in country and you're put in charge of a squad.
Yes.
You're the fresh-faced guy, you show up. I'm assuming there were people in your squad who'd been in country for a while.
Correct.
How did they respond to you?
First thing that I was told when I got there that, yes, I was an NCO and I was going to be trained in the proper techniques and forget about rank, because here's the guy who's going to train you to keep you alive. He was a Spec 4. His name was Gary Weichel. And basically they had told me, different things Gary had been through, operations he had been through. And he's walking around there, he's not wounded, he'd never been wounded, and I figured this is a guy I want to stay close to and learn as much as I can.
What kind of things did you learn from him?
I think we went on ambush patrol every night for the first 2 weeks that I was there.
What was ambush patrol?
We would be sent out of Quanloy anywhere from 6 to 10 kilometers, and we would set up an ambush somewhere on a trail or something where it was pretty much after curfew hours. If they were out there, they were enemy soldiers.
And this would have been along Route 13?
Correct.
Thunder Road?
Yes, out of the Quanloy compound.
How far had the vegetation been cleared back at that point?
At that point, they had vegetation cleared back from the compound itself or from the highway?
From the highway.
From the highway, probably 100 yards on each side at least.
Okay. Why was it necessary to set ambush patrols out there?
We would send them out along the villages because some of the villages that they knew, there may be Viet Cong. There would be people coming to the villages at night trying to induce the population to, give them rice, support them, hide weapons for them, or maybe even fight on the side of the Viet Cong.
Any threat to the highway?
Not a threat to the highway. More just, I guess, just to keep the Viet Cong from building their forces and gaining support in the area.
What was your first night like?
First night I went out on ambush patrol, before I went out I was told a story about the first instant NCO who was killed on his second ambush patrol out.
Who told you the story?
One of the guys in the platoon that was going out on ambush patrol with me.
So this was somebody who had been his NCO?
He had been their NCO, yes.
Okay. Did he say how recently this had happened?
Just a couple weeks prior to that.
Okay.
In fact, I think, if I remember correctly, I figured out years later who it was, and I just don't recall the name right now. But
you figured out who told you the story, or who?
No, who the gentleman was that got killed.
Okay.
And he came into country March 18th, and he was killed on April 4th in an ambush.
What story was told to you?
That I was second instant NCO, and the first one only lasted a week or two.
And that's all they told you?
Yeah.
What was the attitude conveyed to you with that story?
Basically that, you know, I'd better pay attention to what I was doing because
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'd better pay attention to what I was doing because if I didn't, it could be a short lifespan.
Did you sense a lack of respect, or?
I sensed some lack of respect. Once again, the individual who this was coming from, I come to find out later on, was, you know, had a lack of respect for just about everything. But I think it was more to scare me. Once again, I wasn't out there to prove anything. I was out there, and Gary Weichel was guiding me.
Okay.
So I was paying attention to what he was telling me and learning what I could learn.
How many people in this ambush?
There were just a squad-size ambush,
Okay.
probably 8 to 10 people.
Okay. How did it go?
Went fine, no problems. Like I say, we went out, I think, just about every night for the first 2 weeks. And Quanloy at that point was a relatively safe area. I talked to Captain Tabb several years ago at the First Infantry Division reunion, and he was my company commander when I first got there. And he told us that, you know, they used to send us out 6 to 10 clicks because nothing ever happened around Quanloy, nothing major. You know, if we found 1 or 2 VC walking the trail at night, you know, we could handle that. But it was basically a training mission for us.
Okay. What did you do when you got to your position?
When we got to the ambush position, we would scout the area first and either move through it or stop prior to it and just kind of wait until it got almost dark to where you couldn't see. Then we would move into the ambush position and set up. And we would always set up so that you could touch the man next to you and you were all in one sweet little area together. Because if something happened that you had to move, you could all get up and move together and kind of hang on to each other because it would be so dark out there you couldn't see your hand in front of you.
What sorts of precautions did you take?
What do you mean?
Put out claymores?
We would always put out claymores to the flanks, to the rear, to the front. We'd almost surround ourselves with them. And because if you did get any kind of action, that'd be your first line of defense, and it would also be your first line of escape.
What had you learned about how to know if there were VC present?
You could tell by the signs on the trails if the trails were well used, where they were. Sometimes it was just the intel that we would get, you know, from the S2 or S4 when we would be going out on the operation. You know, they would tell us either there's no activity in the area or there's some activity. But again, Quanloy at that point was not a place where we saw a lot of activity.
You have a map with you.
Yes,
Would you mind showing us the map so that we can see Quanloy, like a Benoit, etc.? You just want to hold that up.
You have to excuse me, I have to put my eyes on. Okay. This area right in here was Quanloy, Anlock, Quanloy. I'm sorry, this is Quanloy here, this is Lac down here. Then Quanloy, and then Loch Ninh, and this is the Cambodian border right here. Loch Ninh was positioned about 8 miles from the Cambodian border. So Highway 13 ran from Saigon up through Lac, up through Quanloy, Loch Ninh, out through, I forget now what it was, out here, and then cut into Cambodia.
What's this orange marker over here?
This is Song Bay. That's okay. Song Bay where the base camp was, and this was the big mountain that we had. The airstrip was right in front of the mountain, and It was a pretty sight to look at every morning, but we never really went on the other side of the mountain. It was
Why not?
Just an area we didn't go to.
Okay. Okay. So basically, you're working up and down Highway 13.
Correct.
Okay. When was the first time you were engaged actively in combat?
I think it was, I don't remember exactly the date, but I'm going to say around May 11th
Of
of 67.
1967?
Yeah, and it was out of Quanloy. We were out running I think it was a 2-company operation, and we actually started taking ground fire from a bunker complex. And we had, I know one of the things I had to do was go back and hook up with our APCs so that we could bring them up and get them engaged in the fight.
APC means?
The personnel carrier.
Armored personnel?
Armored personnel carrier,
Okay.
yes.
Occasionally I have to, when we get an acronym like that, I have
Correct.
to stop and ask you to explain it, because hopefully this is in a historical archive and people will be seeing it later on. So we have to stop and explain so everybody knows what we're talking about. I'm sorry, go ahead.
When I went back and I brought the APCs up so that we could get them engaged in the fight, and of course, about that time there was a rocket-propelled grenade that hit very close to one of the APCs, and both my lieutenant, my platoon leader, and myself were knocked flat on our rear ends. And about that time we turned around and looked, and the APCs were going the other way, because as soon as they started firing RPGs, they wanted to get out of the area. So anyway, we engaged the enemy there, and then it started getting dark. And it was later on that evening that my platoon leader was leading an assault on the bunkers, and he got shot in the face. And I figured it would be the last time I'd ever see him. But a couple days later, he was back, had a clean gunshot wound, went in and out. And I figured it had to have been a carbine or a small caliber rifle, because it didn't even break his nose. How that happened, I don't know, but
Who was that?
that was Lee Jones, Lieutenant Lee Jones.
Lieutenant Lee Jones.
And so after that, that's actually when I got my first Purple Heart, because I had caught a piece of shrapnel in that firefight. Didn't even realize it until it was over, and it was really nothing more than a Band-Aid wound, but it was happened during an action, and it was considered a Purple Heart.
Where did you receive the wound?
I think that one was to the arm.
Okay. What did your first combat experience feel like? After you got knocked down by the concussion of that RPG, which stands for rocket-propelled grenade, what did that feel like?
It just, you didn't know what had happened, really. And when you did realize what had happened, then you just wanted to find a place as low to the ground as you could get and stay there. You'd almost want to try and bury your body, just wiggle like a worm and get yourself below ground level, even though that wasn't possible, but you'd actually try to do it. But it was mass confusion. You didn't really know what was going on, where the rounds were coming from, because it was just all gone off at once, and it would be like someone, setting off several hundred firecrackers on the 4th of July. You're just stunned and overwhelmed. You don't know where it's coming from. It takes quite a while before you react to it and get your senses and your bearings.
You're returning fire?
Once we figured out where it was coming from, yes.
How'd that go?
We returned a lot of fire, and like I say, it got into nighttime, and it was actually dark, and then we actually pulled back and called in artillery. So we pounded the area with artillery, and we set up a night defensive position, and we stayed there that night. And then the next morning, we got up and we went back through the area, and by that time they had cleared out.
evidence of casualties?
Didn't find anything.
Okay.
Just a whole lot of bamboo that was destroyed.
By the artillery?
Correct.
Let me ask you a question. You mentioned before that you guys would lay down in such a fashion that you could touch somebody else. What was the procedure? Somebody's keeping watch. What was the procedure on that?
Well, it would be every other man. You're either in 2 or 3 man teams, and there would be one person awake while the other 2 people would sleep, or 1 and 1, whichever. But it was like an hour or 2 hours on and 2 hours off. And once again, you know, if we would see movement or hear something, then you could wake everybody up because the man was right next to you.
How'd you sleep that night?
I don't think I slept at all for the first 2 weeks. I don't think I slept at all. I really don't. Not during the daytime, not during the nighttime. I stayed awake all the time on ambush because I was scared to death.
How were you feeling at the end of those 2 weeks?
I was probably pretty punch happy. Okay. Because it was, we were running patrols every day and ambushing every night. So it's not like we'd come in the day and then relax and sleep, you know, in a base camp. We would go out with the company and run a patrol during the day and then back out on ambush patrol at night.
What was the condition of your clothes at this point?
We would get regular changes because
Okay.
we would get, you know, we were working in and out of the base camp, so we would get a chance to change clothes and hot meals and things of that nature. So the conditions weren't that bad.
At that point, okay. Okay. So you're in your first combat. What's the next big thing that happens to you after that?
After Quanloy, then we moved up to Song Bay.
Do you remember when that was?
I don't remember the dates exactly.
Is it in June, '68?
I think it could have been, yes.
May, June?
May, June time frame.
And Song Bay is where the mountain is that you talked
Correct.
about before.
Yes.
What were you doing in Song Bay?
We set up in a compound with right in front of the airstrip, and there were some ARVNs and some special forces had half of the compound.
ARVNs are?
The Army Republic of Vietnam.
South Vietnamese.
Right, South Vietnamese. And special forces. And then we had the other half of the perimeter. I guess, I'm not sure if that would have been to the north and right in front of the mountain. And then we would run daily patrols out of Song Bay.
Did you do the night ambushes too?
We did night ambushes. Song Bay was an area where we got hit with a lot of mortar rounds. Every night it seemed like we were getting harassed by mortar rounds. And every morning, just about breakfast time, you know, everybody would be lining up for chow. It seemed like you would hear them plunk, 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 and everybody'd head for the bunkers.
How long were you at Song Bay?
I think we were there probably about 6 weeks.
Any significant action there?
Well, yeah, I had actually, at that point, I took over the weapons squad, and which was the machine guns, and another instant NCO came in and took over my old platoon. And he was only there several days, and he actually caught a mortar round right behind him. We had some wounded in the morning chow line. We were going for chow, and we got hit with mortars. And we had some guys wounded, and the NCO's name is Jim Strite, and he was lowering one of the guys into a bunker, and a mortar round hit right behind him. And it did a lot of damage to him. But I mean, he looked like Hamburger, really, from his heels all the way up his back. And so we put him on a dust-off chopper after it was done, and a few other guys. I didn't think I'd ever see him again, but a few weeks later he was back. But
Dust-off chopper would be a medevac hospital?
Medevac chopper, yes.
What kind of machine guns were you working with?
M60s.
M60s. So a machine gun team, how many men in that?
There would be 3 to 4 you'd have a machine gunner and ammo bearers, and we had 2 guns in each platoon.
Okay. And you're in charge of all the guns in your platoon?
Correct.
How much does that machine gun weigh?
Probably about 35, 40 pounds.
How much does a round of ammo weigh?
Well, it
Not
wasn't
a
a
round,
round, it
but
was several hundred rounds
yes,
that they
a
would
belt,
carry, a
I
belt
should say.
or even a box of ammo. And you get weighed down with probably 50, 60 pounds of ammo. Everybody in the platoon was an ammo bearer. We just had some people that carried more than others, but just about everybody in the platoon would carry a belt of ammo with them for the machine guns.
So that's in addition to all your other regular equipment?
Correct.
What else were you carrying?
We were carrying claymore mines, grenades, the web belt with as much stuff as you could get on it, usually 10 to 12 magazines at least per person, and maybe a bandolier of ammo for the M16 rifles.
So how much weight are you walking around with?
I would say probably 40, 50 pounds easily.
Do you remember how much you weighed when you got to Vietnam?
I don't remember exactly what I weighed when I got to Vietnam, but I know I was weighed about 160 pounds, 65 pounds, very shortly after I got there.
How much did you weigh when you finally came home?
When I came home, well, when I got discharged from Walter Reed Hospital, I weighed 142 pounds.
So you'd lost about 23 pounds?
Correct.
Okay. Song Bay. What of significance happens there, other than Jim Strait getting
Actually,
hit in the chow line?
yeah, I had a couple things happen there. One thing was I ended up on a dust-off chopper there because I got stung by a bee, and actually flew up under my helmet and stung me. And I went to brush it away and didn't know what it was. It just stung me, and I took 2 steps and I just went out like a light. And I didn't come to until actually I was back in the compound. They had called a dust-off chopper to get me.
So you're allergic to bee stings?
No, never have been. Just where that one hit me, it was like it just put my lights out. And then shortly after that, we got into a battle up there, and again I caught a piece of shrapnel. This time it was in the leg, and once again it was minor wound, but still it was in battle, and so I collected my second Purple Heart.
Okay. Song Bay, where do you go from there? How long were you at Song Bay?
I think we were there about 6 weeks.
At some point, did you get R&R during this?
Yes, I did. I went on a 3-day in-country R&R.
So you went to Saigon or?
Vung Tau,
Okay.
which was just right on the ocean, and it was very relaxing. They had just a place, you would go for 3-day in-country R&R.
Have a few beers and relax?
Yeah, have a lot of beers.
Okay. Okay. So you returned to Song Bay from there?
I think I went back to Song Bay from there, and then we moved down closer to Saigon.
Okay.
We moved to a place called Tuduc, and it was a little NDP right along Highway 13.
Night defensive position?
It was a little more than that. It was more of a compound. They actually had some buildings there. They were the corrugated metal buildings. And it was just basically a rice paddy that was filled in. And they built a compound on it. And we would run ambush patrols out of there. It was, we called it the Alamo.
Okay.
They had a nickname for it, was the Alamo. I think it was just in the middle of nowhere. Just along Highway 13, right in the middle of the rice paddies though.
Anything significant happen there?
There'd been some action before we got there, but nothing that we really went through there. We would have 2 different companies in the Alamo, and every day one company would stand down and the other company would go out on patrol. And when they would go out on patrol, then they would set up ambush somewhere along the Saigon River at night. And then the next morning, they'd come back into the compound, the other company would go out and do the same thing. So it was like one day on, one day off, and it was a pretty good area. Not much happened while we were there. There was one incident happened one night that I guess some ARVNs were moving through an area, and they were spotted by one of our couple of our choppers, and they didn't know they were ARVNs, and nobody knew they were out there, and apparently they opened up on them. And we had some guys driving up the road in a Jeep from one of the Special Forces compounds, and they were blowing the horn and, you know, trying to let us know that they weren't enemy. And so we just let them go, and they come in, and I guess they had no radio contact with the choppers. And so somehow, through our communications there, they got in touch with them, and they got that stopped. But I understand that they did a pretty nasty thing to them. There were quite a few wounded South Vietnamese soldiers.
Okay, so they hit them pretty hard.
Yep.
Without knowing who they were.
Right.
Okay. Do you know if they had casualties?
I don't know if they had casualties, but I know they had quite a few wounded.
Quite a few wounded. Okay. And a company is about 100 men?
I would say, yeah, actually it would be.
So you got about 200 men in this location.
Correct.
On this old rice paddy. What's the difference between fighting at a rice paddy environment and fighting in a jungle environment?
Rice paddies, it was more open. You could hide behind the dikes, but there was really nowhere to run. And basically, in the jungle, there was places to run, but it was just too hard to move to get there. So either way, at least when you were in the open, though, you could call in your air support, artillery, and you could really tell what type of an effect you were having. When you're in a jungle, you honestly don't know. You're just trying to drop it as close to you as you can, where you think the fire's coming from, and hope for the best.
How long were you at Two Duck?
We were there until July 4th
Of
1967
or 68? 68.
68, I'm sorry, yes.
Okay. July 4th, 1968. You guys have fireworks that day?
We certainly did. The reason I remember the date is because it was the 4th of July, and we had our own fireworks that night along the Saigon River. Not that we saw anything happen. We just blew our ambush to create some fireworks. Celebrate the 4th of July.
Okay. Why do you have to keep setting up night ambushes?
That's when the VC moved most at night. I think that's one thing the military has learned, that if you own the night, you own the terrain. And I think that's where we learned it from, is Vietnam. Because we didn't go out on patrols at night. It was too hard to try and move people. So you would go out and ambush areas at night, a trail or a road or close to a village that you suspected had Viet Cong, and they would move a lot at night.
How would you know if you had Viet Cong in your area moving? I mean, at night, you're laying there in your ambush position.
Most of the areas that we were in had curfews. Villagers were not supposed to be out at night. So if you were out on the trail, you were fair game. Although there were areas where we had villages that it would be no fire zones also, because they were suspected to be friendly villages and not really supporting the VC. But most of the time, if you were out there, you were fair game.
Do you ever know about any incidents where civilians were taken out during an ambush?
We never really blew ambushes. I mean, we blew one along the Saigon River one night on a sampan, but we never found any casualties or anything. So
You shot up the boat?
yeah.
Okay.
But other than that, we never really had any instance where we blew our ambushes. Not because we had movement.
Okay.
And we blew it to celebrate the 4th of July, but
What happened after the 4th of July, 68?
after the 4th of July, we moved into Zion, and actually on the way into Zion was probably a couple-day patrol that we left from the Alamo and actually patrolled our way into Zion. And on the way in, we actually started taking fire from an Arvin compound because we were crossing through an old graveyard, and we actually started taking rounds from the Arvin compound. So they thought that we were the enemy. So of course we weren't allowed to fire back, but it took a few minutes to get that straightened out before they finally quit shooting at us.
Anybody hurt?
No, nobody was wounded, nobody hurt, so everybody was fine.
Okay.
So we continued our patrol and ended up back in Zion.
Okay. And that you're moving into Zion from the Alamo?
Correct.
Okay. What happens at Zion, or where do you go next from there? This would be, we're up now to, I guess, August to September of 68.
Okay, from Zion, we went out on patrol. Well, we actually went up to Loch Ninh. I think this was our first trip up to Loch Ninh. And it was an area that was about 8 miles from the Cambodian border. And what we found out later years, but it was heavily populated with NVA, that it was part of the Ho Chi Minh Trail and one of their resupply routes where they would bring a lot of their petrol fuel into South Vietnam. So it was kind of just right across the border was where they were set up in Cambodia.
Were they bringing other supplies in as well?
Yes, they would bring
as?
Weapons, ammunition, troops, RPGs, rockets, whatever.
Rice, water?
Probably, well, a lot of the rice, we suspected that they were getting from the villagers, that that's some of the support they were, and whether it was they were forcing them to do it or they were doing it, willingly, we never did know, but a lot of it I think was forcibly, and these people just wanted to live, so, they would support whatever they had to do to get by every day.
Okay. You're up at Loch Ninh. What's your experience at Loch Ninh like?
Loch Ninh was a lot different than what we had experienced further south. We were fighting more against NVA soldiers. We went out on one patrol and we got into a battle where, just like all hell broke loose, we found a battalion base camp. And we ambushed a couple North Vietnamese on the trail, and once we had done that, they just started coming from everywhere. I think it was Hill 172 was what it was when it was right close to Loch Ninh there. And they just kept coming. I mean, they were coming off the hill. It was like, I stood up at one point and I looked and I could just see bodies, heads everywhere. And one of the guys in my unit asked me, he says, "Where do we shoot?" And I said, "Just shoot anywhere, because they're all over the damn place." So we got into a major battle there. And then we got a report that there were more people, more North Vietnamese. Somebody had spotted a column moving towards us, so we pulled back and set up a night defensive position. And the next...
How are you? Have you gone out in just an ambush? What's the size of your unit? Have you gone out in greater force?
Yeah, we're running a battalion minus operation that day.
A battalion minus operation means what?
Yeah. It was probably 2 companies and the headquarters company. It wasn't a full battalion. We might have had another company somewhere else, so it was probably 2 companies.
250 to 300 men?
Correct.
Okay.
And we were patrolling, and I would imagine they probably knew there was a base camp in the area or suspected, although that information always didn't filter down what you were really looking for. But I'm sure somebody knew.
Did you notice any, at this point you're engaged with regular Army North Vietnamese?
Correct.
What appreciable differences did you notice between the NVA and the Viet Cong?
They would stand and fight. And they would actually assault us as opposed to defending and having us assault them. Viet Cong were more sporadic, hit and run. They were happy to get a couple wounded and they would cease the action and they'd be gone. Where the North Vietnamese, the NVA, they would stand and fight. They would defend their territory. So they were definitely defending their hill.
Okay. I cut you off where you were saying this was a battalion minus operation. You guys have bumped into a couple North Vietnamese scouts or something. You guys start firing. They're coming down the hill in force.
Correct.
Go ahead.
We were running a column basically around the bottom of this hillside, and we spotted these two enemy, and we took them out. The lead element took them out. And apparently the NVA on the hill didn't realize how big of a force we were. I think they assaulted thinking we were a much smaller force, and so they assaulted us. And I couldn't tell you how many of them there were or anything, but just at one point when I looked, it was like they were everywhere. So it was just like shoot, stay down, fire your weapon, any general direction, you'll hit something. And they were just coming off the hill, coming off that mountain, like assaulting us. And it should say a hillside, not really a mountain, but it was, they had the elevated positions.
How long did this go on?
This went on, well, we pulled back and set up a night defensive position, and we called in airstrikes on the hillside. We called in artillery all night long, and then the next day we tried to go back up. We went back up. We're assaulting this
How
area
far did
again.
you pull back to set up that night position?
Not that far. We just pulled back to an area, it was like a clearing, and we used that for the position where we pulled back to and set up a perimeter. And we just basically dug defensive positions and then let the artillery and the airstrikes work on them during the night.
100 yards, 200 yards, 300 yards?
You know, it was probably more like 500 yards or so.
Okay. What'd you find when you went back in the morning?
They were still there. They hadn't moved out the night before like normally the VC would do. They were staying there to defend their positions. And once we did take the area, then we realized that the bunkers that they had built there were very, very strong. They could withstand the artillery rounds, would hit them and didn't do anything to them. If they would get hit, you know, by an airstrike, that would maybe take them out, but there weren't very many hits. So the bunker complex they had was a very strong bunker complex. So we started calling in more airstrikes and things of that nature, and just by attrition, eventually they finally decided they were pulling out.
How many North Vietnamese did you guys kill in that engagement?
We found a few bunkers. Like I say, there was one bunker that had taken a direct hit from an airstrike. There were probably 4 or 5 dead in the bunker. There were bodies in other areas. There were quite a few bodies. I don't know what the body count was, but there were quite a few dead North Vietnamese.
How many days did this engagement last? This is now 2 days.
This was a two-day deal, and then
How long did it last that second day before they pulled back?
it was most of the day before. It was right before dark, I think. Or no, it wasn't, because we pulled out before dark. So it had to be probably late into the afternoon when they finally moved out of there. And then Then they pulled us back to an area, and we ended up getting on Eagle flights and going back to Lai K.
What's an Eagle flight?
Where choppers picked us up, and they flew us back into Lai K. And I don't know at what point it was.
Did somebody else come in to take your position?
No.
To reinforce you?
No.
So you guys fought over this for 2 days and then went back to Lai K?
Exactly. Well, we went back to Lai K.
What'd you think about that?
I was glad to get out of there.
Okay.
That was fine with me.
Okay.
But we went back to Lai K, and at some point we realized we were missing 2 people. We, in the confusion of putting people on dust-off choppers and this, that, and the other, we were missing 2 people.
Who's we? The 2 companies, your platoon? Or?
It was actually one guy from our platoon, or from our company, I'm sorry, yes. Well, he was from my platoon also. One guy from our platoon and one guy from headquarters company. It was Robert Underwood, who was from my platoon, and also Walter Ferguson, who was from headquarters company.
How'd you discover that Underwood was missing?
We thought he had been on a dust-off chopper, and he wasn't in a hospital or anywhere, and so he was missing in action.
That was at Lai K?
Yes.
You figured this out?
I didn't. The company commander actually figured it out.
How did you feel when you found that out?
Not very good, because we left somebody and didn't know it. But battalion commander got us all together and told us we were going back out. We were going to go find them. If they were out there, we were going to find them. So we went back to the same area, and sometime during the couple days we were gone, the Vietnamese had come and buried all their dead. And we had to dig up graves until we found Underwood's body. They had buried him with their own people. And it was probably the most gruesome thing I ever had to do, because it was not a pretty sight. And you're talking about bodies that were decaying after several days, starting to decompose. And but we had to do it to find him. We found Underwood, took him home, but we never did find Ferguson. And later on I found out that Ferguson had been captured and he was held just about 8 to 10 miles across the border in Cambodia until 1970. And he was killed trying to escape.
What do you think about that?
It could have happened to any of us. But there were quite a few people that were captured. And, they were held, and some of them were treated very bad, very poorly. And I think actually all of them were treated very poorly. But
was that in your mind when you guys went into battle?
Always. That was always the one big fear of being captured.
Do you guys fear that more than being wounded or being
Yes.
killed? You guys returned to Lai K at this point. Had you gone out in company strength, 2 company strength? What?
When we went back out,
Yes.
I think there were 2 companies. I don't think headquarters company was with us. It was just the 2 companies that had been out on the operation before.
Okay. How long did it take you to recover the body?
Most of the day. Just one day.
Okay. Had he been mistreated, do you think?
No.
Okay.
No.
His body hadn't been.
No, I think that, they buried him with their own, just, whether it was a humane thing to do or just that's what they did, or it was dark and they couldn't tell, but, he was buried right beside one of their soldiers.
Okay. How long did it take you to go back? You went back to Lai K that evening? Is that 20 minutes by helicopter? Or?
Yeah, probably. Okay. No more than that, 15, 20 minutes.
What happens back at Lai K then?
Then we just stood down for a few days and regrouped, because everybody was, was kind of a big shock to everybody. Everyone was pretty well bummed out because we'd lost 2 guys and basically didn't even know it until we got back to base camp.
You had heard about the NCO who was with your platoon before you had been killed. Was this the first time that you were aware of American casualties?
Well, no, we had lost another one of our platoon leaders, or platoon people earlier, and his name was John DeMar. And it was actually prior to this that John had been killed. He was one of those people that everybody really liked, you know, just joking, fun guy. Young, he was 19 years old. He was also from Maryland, and John and I got to know each other pretty well because we had that Western Maryland connection. Even though he was not from Western Maryland, he was down close to Baltimore and D.C. But it was something when we lost him, that was, I mean, we didn't lose him, he was killed in action. He spotted a machine gun set up on ready to open up on us, that our whole column was walking into the line of fire, and John opened up on the machine gun first, and which really kept us from walking into the kill zone. And they turned and fired on him and hit him in the neck. And Lee Jones and I, Lieutenant Lee
Jones was the lieutenant who had been shot through the nose.
Yeah, and 2 other men, we found an old door, and we had gone out and got John, and we carried him to the dust-off chopper. And we knew he was pretty bad, but, you know, we thought, just hope for the best. But he didn't make it. And like I say, he was someone that was well-liked by everybody, and that was a big shock to our platoon.
When did you find out he didn't make it?
Probably was several days later. We didn't know, you know, because we asked what happened to him, if he was okay, if he was in the hospital, and that's when they told us no, that he had actually died in the hospital. But he actually died, he lived for several days, but he died of a blood clot.
Mm. How did your men respond to that?
Not real well, because John was really liked by everybody. And we come in from one patrol. We came in from, I'm not even sure where we were, but when we found out about it, Jim Strite and I went to the NCO club and pretty much drowned our sorrows.
The NCO club at?
At Like A.
Okay.
Switch out tapes.
If you need to use the restroom,
They weren't, although I honestly believe that
introductory. By the way, what time is it now? My watch stopped.
20 till 7.
So it's 6:40. I gotta get a new battery. Okay. It is Wednesday, July 16th, 2008. My name is Steve Brown. I'm with the Cantigny First Division Oral History Project. We are in Hudson, Ohio. I'm with Mr. Jack Durst, and this is the second tape of our interview with Mr. Durst. Mr. Durst, going back to your first experience there at Loch Ninh, sometime around August 22nd, 68, at Hill 178. When you initially came into contact with the NVA and you pulled back, how did you accomplish that pullback?
It was just an order given to fall back to a defensive position, and we had several wounded people. So myself and 2 other soldiers were actually going to give cover fire for them to move the wounded back. And this is what we did, and the process was basically, they would start moving, you would jump up and just empty a magazine from your M16 and try to get a second one in and empty it, and then just hightail it back behind them. Just basically lay down cover fire. And during
Do you
that
remember who
process,
the two other men who were helping you with that?
I have no idea. Just
I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
no,
Go ahead.
that's okay. During the process of this, I jumped up and fired the one magazine and then dropped back down to my knee, just to realize that, at that point that I'd kind of messed up.
How
Now,
so?
I was there by myself.
How did that feel?
Not very good. So I loaded the other magazine, I jumped up and I was going to spray it. And when I jumped up, I found myself about the distance of you and I, face to face with an NVA soldier.
We're less than 10 feet apart.
Correct. And he looked at me and I looked at him, and I think we were both startled, and neither one of us fired at each other. We just turned around and went the opposite directions. So I guess he was as scared as I was. But
At what point did you get to stop and think about that experience?
it was a while later before I thought about that and what could have happened or what should have happened, but neither one of us reacted.
What did you see in his face when you looked?
Just basically the same thing I think he saw in mine was fear. And we just went in opposite directions.
Why on earth would you stand out there and subject yourself to enemy fire while the rest of your platoon is taking the wounded out?
Well, somebody had to give them cover fire. You had to support them moving back, because once they started moving, if everybody's moving at once, then you're all going to take fire.
Yeah, but why you? Why didn't you tell somebody else to do it?
I wasn't that type of a platoon sergeant. I never asked anybody to do anything I wouldn't do myself.
Okay. Getting back, let's jump back now chronologically. Let's talk about this. You came back from Loch Ninh. You went out on the recon to recover the body. You came back to Lai Khe. At some point, you have to go up to Loch Ninh again, correct?
Correct.
Did you get promoted during that time period?
Yes, actually, I think it was during that time period that my promotion had come through to Staff Sergeant E6. Something that I had looked forward to, but really never thought that it would happen because a short period of time I was in the service. But I was promoted to Staff Sergeant E6 at that point.
Did you receive any commendations during this time period? Or for this time period?
Yes, I had. At that point, I had already received the Bronze Star and I think the Army Commendation Medal.
Why did you receive the Bronze Star?
The Bronze Star was for an operation where we actually had assaulted a bunker and taken out a position that had us pinned down. Myself and a couple other people in the platoon.
Something tells me there's a little bit more to it than we assaulted the bunker. Mr. Durst, what happened?
It's just, we were actually given the lead element when we had come under fire.
Okay, you were given the point.
They pulled us, well, they actually pulled us up from the rear and told us to take point and move through the area.
Okay.
And
What happened?
we just got up and assaulted the bunker, basically.
You came under fire.
Came under fire. We assaulted them, put hand grenades in on them. Whatever we could do to try to rout them out of there. And actually, when they finally did move out and start running, everybody in the battalion, or not the battalion, everybody that was up close was shooting at them, but they just kept running. Like, it seemed like we couldn't hit them.
Were these NVA or Viet Cong?
These were Viet Cong.
Okay. You did this assault while under fire, correct?
Correct.
So you ran into the face of enemy fire and took out this bunker.
And not very bright, was it?
Why did you do that?
It's Honestly, I don't know what made us do it. It's just we were given the order to do it, and we took it.
Okay. You're back at Like. You've gotten your promotion. You've gotten your commendation and your Bronze Star. What else goes on at Like while you're back?
Well, when we'd come in, and like I say, we had lost John DeMar, and this was something that had bothered us. And Jim Strite and I drowned our sorrows. And when we're on our way back to the company area, we were both pretty well tanked at that point. And Jim, there was an area where there were probably 4 or 5 guys in a tent who had refused to go to the field, and they were waiting court-martial. And at that point, we're going by that tent, and they're all just in there lounging around, listening to rock and roll music. And Jim Strite got the bright idea that we were going to save the Army some money, that we could put a grenade on them and save them the trouble of court-martial them. But we come to our better senses and kept going back to the company area, went back for the night and sacked out.
How far along did he get in that plan?
He got the grenade off his belt.
He didn't pull the pin?
No.
You stopped him?
I'd like to think so.
Do you remember?
We talked about it, but okay. No, we both decided it was not the right thing to do.
Okay.
So,
as long as you've mentioned it, you've talked about the use of alcohol. Were you aware of the use of drugs in your platoon?
yes. Didn't do it on patrol. Everybody basically in the platoon, the company, knew that it was a no-no. What you did in base camp with your own time was your business. And there were guys who would get high, no doubt.
Some of your guys?
Oh yeah. Marijuana was very easily obtainable. Every mama son had a bag with her that, for a couple bucks you could buy a bag of pot and stay high for a week.
Anything else? Opium, anything like that?
That was about the only thing that we saw, was the marijuana.
Okay. And it was a don't ask, don't tell situation for you?
It was, but again, it was base camp only. If you're on patrol, don't even have it with you. Don't be caught with it, because you're gone. Nobody wanted someone, a pothead out there, that they were going to have to depend on.
Okay. What else was encouraging about base camp? Or was base camp encouraging, I should say?
Base camp was, you didn't run patrols out of base camp. Base camps were quite large. Like was large perimeter. They had a lot of activities there, PX, In Like we had our own bar right in the company area. We didn't even have to go to the NCO club or the EM club. They would actually have beer and stuff for us when we come in. But
Change of clothes, shower,
Yep.
hot meals.
take care of your weapons and your needs first, and then just relax.
Did you get mail?
We got mail regularly. Yes.
Who'd you get mail from?
Well, my grandfather wrote to me several times a week. My current wife wrote to me quite often. I had several other people I got letters from home. I had a couple friends that were in Vietnam at the same time that we actually exchanged letters.
So you'd send letters off to somebody somewhere else and you get them back from there?
Yes.
What was that like?
It was very nice, because that was your contact with home. That was your contact with the outside world. Somebody that cared, and somebody that always put a little perfume on their envelopes that, was encouraging.
Did you ever make tape letters home?
No, I didn't.
Did you know other guys who did?
Yes, I knew some people that would do the tapes and send them home.
Okay. Okay. When did you go out next?
I think it was when we went back to Loch Ninn.
September?
Yes, it was September, I think the 12th, or it might have been a little bit earlier, but it was right around that September 12th time frame, because it was there was a report that the NVA were massing again around Loch Ninn. So this time they sent us up, and we flew into Loch Ninn and set up a perimeter just across the airstrip from the MACV compound there. And I think it was the first night we were there, we started taking rocket rounds and mortars, and letting us know that, they knew we were there. They knew where we were at, and they were putting things onto our position, so they had pretty good intel. They knew when we got there and where we had dug in.
How did you know they were putting it on your position?
Well, my bunker caved in on top of me. Was one of the things, and it wasn't really a bunker. It was actually a trench in the rubber trees. There was trenches dug there for defensive positions, and we had just put a little overhead cover on it. And I had a rocket round hit close enough to me that it caved the bunker in on top of me. The top fell in on top of me.
Did you wake up?
Actually, I was asleep and didn't wake up until somebody dug me out.
What happens after that?
After that, next day we were out on patrol.
What were you looking for?
We were looking for the area where the rockets were coming from.
Okay.
We had gone actually through the village of Loch Ninn, and there was a rubber processing plant there. It was basically Loch Ninn was a rubber plantation. And once we went past the processing plant, then we went up into the rubber trees, into the rubber plantation itself, and wasn't too far before we started taking fire.
What happened?
Well, we were pinned down at that point, and it was the lead element. We were actually had the rear of the patrol that day, and somebody had noticed a couple North Vietnamese soldiers, or VC, whichever they were, in a bunker to our flank, and they were basically just popping their heads up and down and firing at the column in front of us. So once we spotted them, we decided that it was almost like a turkey shoot. As they popped their heads up, we'd try to pop them. This went on probably, I don't know how many times we shot at them, but we couldn't hit them. And then finally they got up and started moving, and when they did, they ran the full length of our column, and our entire platoon was shooting at them, and nobody could hit them. So it's kind of like, I thought we were shooting using blanks at that point, because you couldn't hit anything. Then we were called to the front once again, and once again we had a bunker complex that we had to assault, and it was myself, Jim Strite, and Gary Reynolds, a machine gunner. And we assaulted this bunker, and we were taking quite a bit of fire from them, and Reynolds, in the process of assaulting them, the M60 jammed on him, and he was basically standing there wide open trying to clear this machine gun, and we were taking the rounds out of the bunker.
Is he standing and running and firing a machine gun?
Yeah.
All at once?
Yeah, but once it jammed, he stopped.
About a 35-pound, 40-pound machine gun?
Correct. And Reynolds was kind of short. He was probably only about 5'3", 5'4". In fact, when he wanted to become a gunner, he had been an ammo bearer prior to that, and when he wanted to become a gunner, I told him I didn't think he could handle it. And he said, well, give me a chance, because I'm going to prove you wrong. So we gave him a chance, and he was probably one of the best gunners we ever had. Nothing stopped him, and he was a little crazy like the rest of us. But
so he's standing there, nothing's coming out of the gun, it's jammed. Right. What do you guys do?
We put a couple rounds M79 in on the bunkers, threw a couple grenades, and basically neutralized the bunker.
Okay. And what happens then? Neutralize the bunker.
We started moving forward again. About this time, there were several bunkers in the area, and they weren't really complex bunkers. They were more just a defensive position. And a couple of Vietnamese popped up, and they took off running. And once again, everybody's firing at them, and they just kept running right into the rubber, and never touched them.
The NVA respond at all to you guys at this
Not
point?
at that point.
Okay.
We moved out from there, and our patrol moved probably an hour or so. Maybe we were on patrol, moving, trying to find the main body of this element. And right where we were on one patrol, and our scouts platoon was on another patrol, and then there was another company on patrol. And I think it was Charlie Company. And Charlie Company, Delta Company, and the scouts were all supposed to meet up at one spot where our patrols come together. And that's where the North Vietnamese decided to ambush our recon platoon.
Your point platoon.
It was a recon platoon, and they were running a separate patrol of their own.
Okay.
And that's right where they decided to ambush them, where all three of us come together. And they opened up on our recon platoon, and it's just right at the point where we were all coming together, and we had them surrounded. And we ended up, I think, with somewhere between 35 and 40 body count.
Did they retreat?
They didn't
make
weren't
it
able
out?
to. No, we basically had them surrounded. They had nowhere to go.
You lose anybody in those actions?
We had people wounded. This whole process, I think we started on September 12th or 11th or somewhere in that middle of September. And it was about 4 days we were out there going through this entire process, and every day we were into a new firefight. And I know our recon platoon leader was wounded in that action, and there were several other people wounded. We got our dust off, got our people out, and then we continued on patrol trying to find this main body. And we had several more skirmishes where we would find them, they would fight for a while, and then they would move. So apparently they had several complexes where they would just move them from one bunker complex to another. This is when my friend Bill Otto, he got wounded in this operation, and I don't remember exactly the date, but he had actually caught a round, went in his mouth and out the side of his face, and took a few of his teeth and everything out, and he was pretty bad shape, a lot of blood, and he was waiting for the dust-off chopper, and we were moving up through there, and that's the first time I had seen Bill for a couple of weeks. And I remember he grabbed a hold of me and he says, "Durst," he says, "how do I look?" And I said, "Just as ugly as you ever looked, Otto, it's a difference." And he just kind of laughed, and we moved on. And when I talked to him several years ago, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago, I got in touch with him, and that was the one thing he remembered, was what I told him that night. But,
was that the end of his action in Vietnam?
That was the end of his action,
done.
yes. He ended up coming home right after that. Then we moved out, got into another firefight the next day, and this time they hit our lead element, and when they hit the lead element, they were trying to flank us. And in the process of trying to flank us, we saw them moving to our flanks. And so I went back to the rear element, and I set everybody up in a defensive position so that when they hit us from the rear, we were ready for them. And we actually had the high ground. We were on the top of a little knoll, And when they come up over, when they got up to where we were at, we opened up on them. And one of the first rounds that somebody fired, they hit an RPG carrier, or a guy that was carrying the propellant, and he basically just burst into flames. And took out several of his own troops with him. The RPG guy and a couple probably, they were also bearing the propellant and the RPG's carriers. But that was the beginning of that. They assaulted us from the rear, but we were there ready for them. And basically, I was just moving around, setting up the defensive position and moving people where we needed to move them, you know. And we held them off, beat them back, and then we moved back through the area to, you know, sweep the area, see what kind of body count we had. And that's when we spotted one guy who was going back with a radio and
An NVA?
NVA, and we opened up on him. Actually, I think Jim Strite opened up on him and hit him in the legs, and he went down. And we were trying to take him captive, but he was on the radio and figured he was calling in artillery on us, so we had to take him out. When couldn't even salvage the radio; it had so many holes in it.
How many more days did this go on?
That was the last day we spent out there. I think it was the 11th Armored Cav maybe that moved in and picked us up on APCs and took us back to Loch Ninh. And when we got back into Loch Ninh, we only had 9 people left in my platoon.
How many did you go out with?
We went out with a full platoon, was probably 30, 35.
So you lost 2/3 of your men?
Yes. Either mostly wounded. You know, during the operation there were some people killed, but it was mostly wounded. But when we come back in, there were only, like I say, 9 of us in the platoon that had not been put on a dust-off or wounded, killed, or whatever. So
How about Mike platoon? Did they lose anybody?
we lost,
You were Mike platoon?
yes, we lost several people in this operation. We lost Pena, we lost, oh goodness gracious. I
Why
can't
do you
think
remember
of the names.
Pena?
Well, Pena was he was a full-blooded Indian. He was a Zuni Indian from New Mexico. And he was just, you know, he was Pena. He was chief. Everybody knew him. And he was really well-liked, good guy.
What set him apart?
Just, I think we picked on him a lot because he was Indian. And
What
he
was his first name? Ernest?
Ernest Pena.
Okay. Again, I have to ask you some questions. You were awarded the Silver Star for your actions at Loch Ninh?
Correct.
Why?
Well, I guess I was supposedly setting up the defensive and moving people into defensive position that kept us from being overrun. And I was doing this while we were taking fire.
The commendation says, as the friendly force proceeded through the treacherous terrain, it was suddenly subjected to intense rocket-propelled grenade and automatic weapons fire from well-fortified North Vietnamese bunkers. With complete disregard for his personal safety, Sergeant Durst advanced through the hail of hostile rounds toward the enemy emplacements and put forth a suppressive barrage from his automatic rifle as he moved. He then threw several hand grenades which destroyed the insurgent fortifications and killed other aggressors with fire from his weapon as they fled the devastating explosions of his hand grenades. His exemplary courage, outstanding professionalism, and heroic determination were instrumental in destroying several enemy bunkers and significantly contributed to the successful outcome of the encounter. You kind of understate what you did, don't you?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Don't know. It's just the way I am.
Why were you able to do that?
It was just had to be done. I mean, those were the types of things that everyday people did, and they did them every day. It's not because they're heroic, not because they want recognized for it. It's just it's there and it has to be done, and somebody has to do it.
And you were the guy who did that sort of thing?
Occasionally, yeah.
Okay. Were you wounded in that action?
Actually, in that action, I was not wounded at all.
Okay. You wounded again on September 21st?
Correct.
What were the circumstances there?
We actually got ambushed from a element that was trailing us from the rear, and they had it pretty well scoped out that when we stopped, anytime we stopped, we would always put out our rear defenses and our flank defensive, and when the column stopped, they hit us before we got our defenses out. And basically it was like ambushing us from the rear.
Where were you moving from at the time?
Honestly, I don't know. We were just on a patrol, and we had been
Out of Lyke or?
I believe yes, we were out of Lyke.
Okay.
But I really don't know where we were.
Okay.
But they hit us from the rear, and there was a grenade, rocket-propelled grenade, something. I actually think it was an M79 grenade, one of our own weapons, that they had probably captured, but it went off right close to me, and I had shrapnel wound in the head and a shrapnel wound in the arm, and the arm was one of those that had hit a vessel that it was just a stream of blood coming out every time the heart pumped. And I didn't actually even know that I had the head wound until I felt something run in my face, and when I wiped it away, it was blood. But in that operation, my radio operator and one of my machine gunners both were killed in that operation. And the machine gunner was to my right and the radio operator to my left.
Was that the result of the grenade blast that?
The grenade blast was what took out my radio operator and wounded me, and my machine gunner was hit by a rifle round.
Do you ever think about that?
Many times.
What do you think?
I was very lucky.
You ever wonder why it was you that lived?
I think you always wonder that. There were so many times that things happened that you wonder how you walk away from them. But you do. So you just have to continue on and make the best of every day.
Do you know the names of those men?
Yes, I do.
Who were they?
It was David Latch and Thomas Mitchell.
What kind of men were they?
They were both great guys. Latch was from Philadelphia, and excuse me, Tom Mitchell was from Canton, Ohio.
How is it that you knew so much about these guys?
Actually, I mean, I knew him when we were there. Latch was my radio operator, so him and I spent a lot of time together. When we were on patrol, he's always right next to me. Tom Mitchell was one of my gunners when I was the weapons squad leader. He was one of the machine gunners that I'd work close with every day. So you get to know some history, of the people, even though you had kind of learned that you don't want to get to know people because you don't know when they'll be gone.
About this time, General Ware.
That was actually during the operation we were at Loch Nin. September, I'm pretty sure it was September 13th when his chopper went down. And the first of the second was in a major battle up there, and also the 1st of the 28th, which was another battalion that was just to the east of us, or I'm sorry, to the south of us. And we were both engaged in heavy fighting at Loch Nen. And Major General Ware had come out, flown up there to personally supervise the operation or to see what was going on. And his chopper was shot down.
When did you find out about that?
It wasn't until probably weeks later.
Till you got back?
Yeah.
What was the response? What was your response to that?
It wasn't really, we didn't know that much about him. I found out later that, even though I hadn't met him, but I had met his command sergeant major one time on an NDP that we were on.
Sergeant Major Venable?
Yes. And didn't even know who he was, just met him, and someone told me he was command sergeant major of the First Division. But he had come out and talked to us, and we were on our bunker line, wanted to know how things were going, how we were being treated, if we had ample supplies, things of that nature. So
And you told him?
Well, at that point we didn't, because that was a little NDP that we were on that the only way we got resupplied was flyby, and they would just push it out of the chopper and hope that it survived the fall. We'd been out there about 10 days, no mail, no water, couldn't take a shower, no change of clothes, and he was quite accommodating to us. He sent the chopper out and they come back with our mail. They had water, ice cream, which was something you never saw on an NDP, but that's just the type of person he was.
Did the helicopter land?
Yes, it actually landed.
They just didn't drop it on your head?
It landed right in the middle of our NDP, and actually it was Major General Ware and Venerable who landed there because Ware wanted to know what was going on. And even though every chopper that come in there, we would get mortars and rockets, they still landed and they got in and out.
What kind of impression did that make on you?
It made an impression on me that these were people that cared. They were concerned what was going on, and concerned with the soldiers that were on the line. I did find out later on that Major General Ware had been a Medal of Honor winner in the Second World War. I didn't find that out until a long time after, but
We talked about being in action in September, and you're wounded yet again. You must have been a magnet for shrapnel.
yes.
Okay, what happened with this? I got off course there. You've got this wound and blood is coursing out of it. Did you get evacuated? What happened?
Yes, I ended up spending several days in the hospital, and
Where at?
actually it was the 93rd Medevac at Long Bend.
Okay.
And they bandaged my head up, they bandaged my arm up, then they sent me back to my company. And of course I couldn't wear a steel pot, so I said there was no way I was going back to the field. So they actually sent me down to Saigon to find a guy who had gone AWOL and pretty much knew where he was from our company. And they told me to go bring him back and, let him know that if he didn't come back with me, he was going to be considered a deserter. So I found him first day I was there, and told him I wanted him to go back, but I wasn't going back for a few days myself. So I spent a few days R&R in Saigon before we went back. And then he went back with me, and then my R&R actually came up at that point, so I went to Australia for my R&R, 6-day R&R. And of course I extended as many days as I could, because at this point I think I had the shakes a little bit, third time wounded. Didn't want to go back to the field.
What do you mean you had the shakes?
You get nervous, but charms are running out. The next one might be the big one.
How did you extend your leave in Australia? How were you able to accomplish that?
I didn't do it in Australia. I actually did it in Saigon after I got back. Before I left and actually after I got back, I just spent a few extra days in Saigon.
No consequences when you got back?
No.
Was anybody worried that you weren't going to come back?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think they knew I was coming back. It was just a matter of when.
Okay.
But
Did you get yourself straight?
No, not completely, but enough that I was ready to go back to the field then.
You felt like you could function in the field?
Correct.
Then. So when did you get back? What did you do in Australia?
Relaxed.
Okay.
A lot of partying, a lot of drinking. 6 days and 6 nights, and probably 4 hours of sleep in the time period.
Okay. When did you get back to your unit?
September. Get wounded on the 22nd. It was probably into October when I got back.
Wasn't too long after that that you did get the big wound.
Correct.
How'd
That
that
was
happen?
December 19th, 1968. We were on an operation following B-52s. We would fly on choppers, and we'd be going one direction, and we would actually watch the B-52s lay down their carpet bombing. And then we would fly in right behind them before the dust settled to clear anything out that was left. And I got there, and the one operation, we went in behind them, and they had hit a major base camp and hadn't cleared the whole thing out. And we got in there, and I walked into an ambush, cut around in the stomach, went in the front, out the back.
And did you stop fighting immediately?
Yes, that was it for me, pretty much. I went down. My legs just gave out from under me, and I just kind of turned halfway around and went down on the ground. And of course, as I was laying there, I think I was still somewhere close to the line of fire because they kept firing rounds very close to my face. They were just hitting in front of me and throwing dirt in my face. But I must have been just enough out of the line of fire that they couldn't hit me. And I just played dead and hoped that they would quit shooting.
How long did you lay there?
I honestly don't know, but it seemed like forever because I was laying out there yet, and they had actually called in an airstrike. And so how long it takes to get an airstrike, I'm really not sure, but it doesn't happen in 5 minutes, I guarantee you. And basically, they thought that I was dead. So after the airstrikes came in, they dropped napalm. And when they dropped the napalm, it was so close to me that basically scorched all the hair on my body, my arms, my eyebrows, my face. It was just, I would beat red because I was that close to it. And then I heard someone moving, and I wasn't sure if it was our guys or theirs. And I figured, well, if they're going to get me, I'm going to take some with me. So I just pulled my M16 up to me and put it on automatic. And then I heard someone talking, and I heard it was our medic, Doc Newby. And next thing I knew, Doc Newby grabbed me by the cuff of the neck, and when I looked up at him, he just kind of gave me a stare like he thought he was pulling in a dead body. So anyway, they got me back, got me patched up.
What did Doc Newby do for you?
Just bandaged the wounds, drug my butt in and bandaged me up. And then we were in an area that was kind of thick. They didn't want to move me, so they actually blew a landing zone for the dust-off chopper to come in and get me.
What do you mean they blew a landing zone?
Well, they just wrapped det cord and C4 around a few trees and cleared the area.
Okay.
And so they brought a dust-off chopper in, and that's when they took me out. And Right before I left, I know a company commander had come over and he had asked Doc Newby how I was doing, and Doc just shook his head, you know, that's not good. So,
He didn't necessarily think you were going to make it?
Yep, he didn't think I was going to make it. So he put me on the chopper. I'm on my way in, and just closed my eyes, and next thing I knew, somebody grabbed me by the neck, and it was the medic on the chopper. And when he let go, I opened my eyes, and he's tapping the chopper pilot on the shoulder and telling me, "You better hurry, this one ain't going to make it." And I went, "Oh, no." So I just looked at him, and he turned around, and he looked at me, and he says, "Keep your eyes open, okay?" I said, "Oh, yeah. There's no way I'm closing them again." So they got me back to, I think they flew me back into Quanloy at that point, to the medevac there. Didn't stay there very long. They dressed the wounds, put an IV and stuff in me, and put me back in a chopper and flew me to the 93rd medevac at Long Bend. And I was, they took me straight into an operating room, and that basically was the last thing that I remembered. I was out. And I come to a couple of days later, I guess, when I finally come to my senses, and it was right around Christmas. The Bob Hope show was at Long Bend. And I was the only one in my ward that didn't get to go see the Bob Hope show because I had too many. I had IV in both arms, a tube down my nose, a catheter. It was a pretty sad sight. But
Did they ever tell you what damage it had done to you?
Yeah, said that they had to remove part of my intestines, and that the bullet had missed all the major things like the kidneys and stuff like that, but it was very close. But I had a fractured hip, removed part of my intestines, and they patched me up, and then they sent me to Japan, to the 106th in Yokohama, Japan. And from there, they sent me back to Walter Reed Hospital in D.C.
We'll stop there.
Oh,
Yeah.
You don't have to get all the way down to Cairo. It'll be downstate. If you're out of Chicago, you're downstate.
Thanks, Rob.
Okay. It is July 16th, Wednesday, 2008. This is Steve Brown with the Cantigny First Division Oral History Project, and I'm with Mr. Jack Durst in Hudson, Ohio, and we're on tape number 3 of this interview. We've just talked about you've been evacuated, you've been operated on, you're in Yokohama, Japan, is that correct?
Correct.
What happens from there?
Well, when I got to Yokohama, Japan, one of the guys in my platoon had been wounded just a few days before me. His name was Mark Lutz, and I had heard that he had left Long Bend just a couple days before me. So when I got to Yokohama, I figured he might be there, and I asked, and the nurse said, "Yeah, he's in the one floor above you." And I said, "Oh, okay, good. I'll go visit him tomorrow." So the next day, I got up and I went up to visit Mark Lutz, and when I got there, I asked the nurse where he was at, and she said that he's no longer with us. And I said, "What, did he go home already?" And she said, "No, he's no longer with us." And apparently he had a blood clot during the night and had passed away. And just because I was so tired getting in that day from the flight and everything that I didn't go see him. And it really just shook me up. And I just keep losing people, you know, good friends. And my biggest fear was that they were going to patch me up and send me back to Vietnam. But the doctor actually came, captain, I don't remember what his name was, but he told me, he says, "Now, Durst," he says, "you're going stateside." He said, "You'll be at Walter Reed Hospital convalescing." So I think it was New Year's Eve. I called my sister and wished her a happy New Year's. Talked to my mother, and that was the first that she knew I was wounded. And so I told her I was coming home, be home in a couple weeks, and I think I was in Japan 5 or 6 days, and then flown back to Walter Reed Hospital. And I spent a couple days at Walter Reed Hospital, and then they gave me a convalescent leave. I went home for 30 days on a convalescent leave, and I came back after that, spent a few more days there, and then they gave me my discharge on my 21st birthday from Walter Reed Hospital.
Where'd you go on that 30-day leave?
I went to Western Maryland, spent some time with my grandparents, and then to Cleveland. My mother lived in Cleveland, and my sister.
Okay.
So,
Nobody else there?
yeah, my current wife spent a little time with her.
Okay. What kind of reception did you receive when you got home, generally speaking?
Actually, the reception that I received when I come home was very positive. And this was one of the things, I attribute that to coming from the area that I come from in Maryland, because everybody in town knew me. I was the paper boy. You know, I delivered newspapers from the time I was 12 years old until I graduated from high school. So everybody knew me, everybody liked me. I was very welcome. You know, I was a hero there. Nobody would say anything bad against the war. They would just support the troops.
Did you run into any sorts of negative response later on?
I did, actually, when I was home convalescing, I got thrown in jail in Ridgely, West Virginia.
In where, West Virginia?
Yeah, Ridgely, West Virginia.
Okay.
And it was one of those things where, yeah, we were wrong, but, you know, the treatment that we got was not anywhere close to what we should have been afforded.
Okay, first of all, who's we?
It was myself, Eddie Egan, and Fred Metz, two other veterans that had just come home from Vietnam also.
And they were from your hometown, or?
Yes. Well, one of them, Eddie Egan, was from my hometown. He was actually in the Air Force. And Fred Metz, I had gone with somebody I knew from high school from playing sports, and he had been also in Vietnam in the Army.
Okay. What happened?
We were basically locked up.
No. How did you end up locked up?
Oh, well, it was, we were in a dance hall, and we were coming off a dance floor. We were dancing with a couple girls, and there was a table full of beer bottles. And at some point, Eddie Egan run into the table, and the bottles just kind of rolled on the floor. And I was walking right behind him and kicked one of them, and it hit another one and broke. So when I bent down to pick up the glass, and just as I was doing that, somebody grabbed me by the cuff of the neck, and they shoved me down and told me, "You're going to pick that up." And I looked up at him and said, "No, I ain't." So we were tossed from the place. And I do literally mean tossed. I was picked up by the cuff of the neck and the ass of the pants and carried to the door and thrown out.
How'd you respond?
I was going back in.
Okay.
But when I got to the door, there was a police officer there who stopped me.
Okay.
And he said, "You don't want to do that." And I said, "Okay, I realize I'm wrong. Fine, I'm out of here." And about that time, he says, "No, you're not out of here. You're under arrest."
Okay.
So
it wasn't so much that you were being. Was this because you were a veteran?
yeah, it was just because we had too much to drink, basically. But then the response that we got from the officer who arrested us, well, one of my friends said, "Hey, you know, we're all Vietnam veterans here," and he says, "We just got together. We know we're wrong. We shouldn't have done what we done, but we did." And he said, "That's tough. We're locking you up anyway." And then there was an article in the paper about it a couple weeks after that, and there were some comments made that these young punks and their tin medals think they can come over here and do anything. So
How far away was that from your hometown?
probably about 12 miles.
How'd that affect you?
I just wanted to get it behind me, and because I was still in the Army at that point, and I figured it was better off to just leave it go, and I was wrong, take my punishment, pay my fine, and never went back.
What about the tin metal reference?
That was something that bothered me, but that's what a lot of people felt, you know, that, I mean, I didn't really, like I say, the town I come back to, everybody accepted you, you know, for what you did, that you served your country. But there were a lot of people who, you know, had the negative feelings, baby killers, whatever. But it was just something that, I never wore a uniform after the day I got home. I never wore a uniform the whole time I was on leave. I never wore it after that. I never put it on again.
How'd you end up in Ohio?
I'd moved out here to work, and I had a job at TRW that I could go back to because I had so much time to go back. So I came back to Ohio and went back to work there and started a life here.
Got on with your life. Any after effects through the years of your combat experience?
Yeah, there were some early on.
Such as?
Bad dreams, nightmares, just all kinds of stuff.
Loud noises bother you?
Oh yes, they still do, 40 years later.
What happens?
I'm diving for cover. I'm reacting to them.
Issues with sweating at night, or?
Had night sweats, wake up, the bed be soaking wet, nightmares. My nightmare was always same one, you know, getting shot in the head. That was the one that always bothered me most.
How long, when was the last time you experienced that?
Oh, God, I don't know. Last nightmare I had was that actually I was going back to Vietnam. But somehow they screwed up and he got orders to send me back. And they couldn't fix them until I got there for some reason. But the bad nightmares, I don't know, they lasted for quite a few years. But I would say in the last 10 to 15 years, you know, no.
Okay. You brought some pictures along. Can we see those?
Sure. This one thing here was, I didn't tell you the history of this, but this was, we were called the Black Scarf Battalion, 1st Battalion, 2nd Infantry. And that was, all the time we wore these on patrol. And we would leave them occasionally as our calling card.
What do you mean you wore them? Where'd you wear them?
While we were out
On
in the
your
jungle.
head?
No, we wore them around the neck.
Okay.
And they made a great scarf to keep the sweat off of you, too. This is a picture of me when I first came home.
After,
This was taken in January 1969.
so after Walter Reed.
Correct. I weighed 142 pounds when I got discharged from Walter Reed Hospital. Like I say, it was on my 21st birthday, so it was a very nice birthday present. I have a picture here of, this was the Mike Platoon NCOs, myself and 3 of the squad leaders.
Okay, you're the one with the cigarette in your mouth?
Of course.
Okay. Who's the gentleman leaning over?
Leaning over is Dick Heim.
Who's behind him?
Next to him is Jim Strite. And the other gentleman, I can't even remember his name.
On his knee?
Yes.
You don't remember his name, but that's Jim Strite, who is now a farmer in Illinois.
Correct.
Okay.
This picture is of myself and Dick Heim. This was taken at Loch Ninh.
You look kind of happy.
I don't know why. Because it wasn't a happy place. And this is, also of myself and Jim Strite at Loch Ninh.
Now you're wearing heavier clothing in that picture. Why?
The nights would get cold. Nights got very cold sometimes. And it was very wet.
Okay.
And then this was this is another picture that was taken at Loch Ness. I blew all these up because I have trouble seeing them anymore. But that's myself. This is Doc Newby, the medic that drug me out the last time I was wounded. This is Dick Heim. This gentleman's name was Pate. His last name is Pate, but I don't remember his first name. And this is Gary Weichel in the background. Gary was the Spec 4 that trained me when I first got to Vietnam.
Is he still around?
Gary lives in Dayton, Ohio. And he had an accident a couple years ago. He's a farmer also. And he got caught up in a tractor. And because he also has, he's diabetic, he ended up losing both of his legs. And myself, Jim Strite, or not Jim Strite, I'm sorry, Lee Jones, and Mike Quinn went to visit him last year for his birthday. We surprised him, went to visit him for his birthday. And got in touch with his wife, and she set it up. And we met in Dayton, Ohio, and surprised him Saturday night for his birthday.
These guys are pretty important to you.
Yeah, we've kept in touch. We've met several times. We met at the First Infantry Division reunion, and we try to keep in touch. There's probably not a week goes by that I don't get an email from or email to Jim and, or not Jim, I'm sorry, Mike and Lee.
Why do you suppose it is that these guys are so important to you?
I think it's just the experience that we all went through together in Vietnam. You build a bond, and that bond is long-lasting. It really is. When I say like a band of brothers, it truthfully is. There are a lot of other people we've lost contact with. We'd love to be able to get in touch with them, but you just haven't been able to track them down.
Is there anything else you'd like to add that I've failed to talk to you about or hasn't come to mind that you think you'd like to have recorded at this time? Any memories?
I think we've covered just about everything.
Well, sir, on behalf of...
I'm getting a signal from someone else in the room here.
Just tell them about your meeting with John DeMar's family.
Oh, yes.
John DeMar.
John
The
DeMar.
voice that we're getting off camera is Mrs. Durst. So,
John DeMar, several years ago, I'm going to say 4 years ago, myself and Lee Jones had found out where John DeMar was from, Maryland. And Lee had found his sister's address and phone number. And Lee gave her a call. And she told us that the Disabled American Veterans Organization in Waldorf, Maryland is named in John's honor. And he was killed in Vietnam. And we decided to go down and visit his family. So we went for Memorial Day weekend.
how long ago was this?
4 years ago. And didn't know what to expect. His sister told us that his brother had become an alcoholic because he was an older brother and always felt that he should have gone to Vietnam instead of John. And he said that he may not talk to us. But we said, well, we're going to go anyway. So we went, and we're sitting in a restaurant in Waldorf, Maryland, waiting to meet with them. And when they came in, they walked right past our table, and John's father, who was still living, walked over to two young guys sitting at the table and asked them if they were Lee and Mike. And they looked at him and said, no. And I said, or Lee and Jack. And I said, I'm Jack. And he turned around and he looked at us and he said, you guys are old. And it was like, what's he saying? We didn't realize it, but he sent his son off to war at 19 years old. And he was expecting to meet his friends And that's what he was associating our ages with the age that his son was when he left. So he had gone over and started talking to these two young guys, and he thought we were old guys.
So Jack was frozen at 19 for him.
Yes. But then they told us that we were going to their family farm, and they were having a pig roast, and we had to meet all of his relatives. And so we went there, and his brother was there. And his brother didn't really say much. He said hello to us, and that was it. And as the evening went on, Lee and I were standing there talking together, and he walked up to us and he says, "How did my brother die?" And Lee just looked at me and he said, "You got to do this because I can't." So I explained to him what had happened, you know, what his brother sacrificed for us. And
This was the man who had stood up with a machine gun and returned fire, correct?
he opened up on a machine gun bunker, or a machine gun position,
Drawing
and
their
basically
fire.
saved us from walking into it. Yes. So I told him exactly what had happened and what he had done. And he looked at me and he said, "That sounds like John." And that was pretty much it. Then we went to a memorial service that day, or the Memorial Day for him. And then we went back into D.C. and we went to the wall, and then headed home from there that night.
What was the wall experience like for you?
It was tough. It was tough. I mean, that whole weekend was tough. It was it was a very, very emotional weekend.
How'd you feel when you got done?
Very glad that we had done it, because it was tied a lot of loose ends for us.
Well, Mr. Durst, on behalf of myself and my family and Cantigny, I thank you for your service.
Thank you.